Welcome to Anchor New England. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here today to talk about a really interesting subject and actually something that's really relevant to our world today, a kind of cultural apologetic, if you will. Recently, a man by the name of Jordan Peterson, whom many of our listeners are probably aware of, basically poured his heart out, in a sense, and he sent a message to the Christian church. And so we'd like to take some time today to react to Peterson's message, affirm some of the things that we think he says which are good, and perhaps try to maybe speak about some of the things that we might disagree with. So for those of you who aren't familiar, what we're going to do is we're going to leave a link to the video in the comments so that folks can go ahead and watch that.
It's not terribly long. I think it was like 15 minutes or something, maybe.
Yeah, it's 10 or 15 minutes. And what we're going to do, just kind of the format of this, is we're going to talk about some of the things that he says and reference some of the quotes that he's made in the video, and then react to them. Now, for those who aren't familiar, Jordan Peterson is a psychologist and a professor. He taught in Toronto, and he's been a psychologist for many, many years, many decades, and is coming from things from a Jungian kind of a perspective, and really, I think, shares a lot in common with the Christian worldview. In
kind
terms,
of a conservative thought leader, I would say.
Yeah, he has a very similar worldview. He is not a professing Christian. I think that we need to make that clear. He believes in a God of sorts, almost like an archetypal figure, though, not necessarily a God who really exists actually, but the greatest of all possible ends, I suppose you could characterize his view of God as, and therefore everything in his worldview is very objective, and he does have a sense of truth, of right and of wrong. And it was very outspoken about that. In fact, this is why he became sort of internet famous and really had a YouTube video basically go viral. So, and he had a confrontation with some young people whom he during his time as a professor, about compelled speech, and there was a law in Canada at the time that he was really objecting to, where they were trying to compel certain types of speech, and he was very concerned about that, and became very well known after that video went viral. So Peterson has, in some respects, become a thought leader.
Yeah. And as you pointed out, things that he says many things that we would agree with, or that it seems we could agree with. He says some things that sound almost Christian,
Yeah. And
and in fact, if you sort of scroll through, videos on YouTube that reference him, there are many that sort of are entitled something like, "Is Jordan Peterson a Christian?"
Yeah.
Or "Is he about to become a Christian?" And I sort of think of that line from The Princess Bride. I don't think that means what you think it means.
Right.
Because sometimes he says things that sound Christian-ish, but if you sort of like
parse it,
peel up that sticker a little bit and look underneath, you go, I don't think he means what you think he means.
Exactly. Yeah, he's very nuanced with the way he communicates. His language is very careful. So every word is carefully chosen, and it means a specific thing to him. And I think sometimes what we want to do is take and project our own ideas onto what he is saying so that it means what we think it means. but that's not necessarily the case with Peterson. So you have to be really careful about that. The other thing that we have to be careful about is that because there's such an affinity with his thought process, that a lot of Christians have wanted to own him for their own cultural objectives. And this is where it gets a little tricky, because in his message to the Christian churches, he, I think, is speaking to a particular audience who values his opinion and who will actually put into place the very recommendations which he's suggesting as a non-Christian. So this actually kind of brings me to the first point, which is that Peterson kind of opens his message to Christians saying that he's being presumptuous and about speaking to the church, because he realizes that he's not a Christian. He's an unbeliever.
He's speaking from outside.
Yeah. Now, it seems as though by saying this, he's projecting some kind of humility. So he realizes his own presumptuousness, and so he's projecting this kind of humility. But then he follows it up by saying he has something to say, and it needs to be said.
Yeah.
So he's not necessarily being humble.
No.
What he's trying to do is open the door to saying the thing that he believes
Yeah.
he is the one to say.
In my notes, I put a timestamp of 23 seconds and then wrote, yup.
Yep.
Am I being presumptuous? Yup.
Absolutely. Now, I would agree that many in the church have been attracted to Peterson's kind of take no prisoners approach to cultural warfare. And this really brings me to my first question, which is, to what degree, if any, should the church be listening to Peterson? And should he have any influence over how the church views itself or how it operates?
I have a tough time with that one. So in the cultural wars, there is a sense in which the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
You know, he's been very critical of left-wing policies of people like Justin Trudeau because, Peterson is Canadian. And would certainly be on the Christian church's side in certain cases, like if the government said, "Hey, you guys got to shut down," or "We're going to limit your speech so you can't say certain things." Peterson would certainly, we would say, be on the right side of issues like those. But I have a tough time with someone outside the church prescribing to the church what the church should be doing. I mean, how do you feel about? I mean, his primary thing seemed to be invite the men back. I'm not sure. That's one of those things where it's like I'm not sure that's going to do what you think it's going to do.
Well, I mean, so we'll get to the particulars, but I think so. In one sense, I'm not the kind of guy that says, "Well, if you're not a woman, you can't speak to women's issues" or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're not a part of a particular identity group, then you're not allowed to speak about or into the situation of that identity group.
Except that, what does he think is accomplished by the activities that will be adopted by the group that you're speaking to that you're not a part of? He doesn't accept the gospel as far as I can tell. So you're going to tell us how to propagate the gospel, something that you yourself don't accept.
Right. Yeah. And so that kind of gets to the deeper question, which is, what is Peterson's motivation in all of this? And it seems to me that he does recognize that there's value in the institution of the church. Now, that value may not be well recognized by the rest of culture society, but he's looked back to the past and seen the influence that the church has had on culture and the important role that it plays in culture. And so it seems to me that he sees the church as a tool to accomplish a particular purpose.
It's sort of like how in the Middle Ages, the church preserved, books and music, and was sort of like an ark for culture during a dark time. I think he wants the church to be that now.
Right, right. So he sees this, rightly so. He sees that the church has an effective preserving culture of being a prophetic voice in culture. There's a kind of salt and light quality that I think he recognizes, and he understands that. But I don't think that he understands what makes the salt salty and what makes the light light.
Yeah.
And that's the issue, which kind of speaks to the next thing that he talks about. Now, he goes on to establish his bona fides as a teacher of the Bible, and he says that he's done a series of lectures through the book of Genesis. I think he said like 15 lectures or something through the book of Genesis, and he indicates that he taught that entire book through the lens of psychology. And he drew extremely large crowds. And in fact, he said he sold out a theater. Miracle of miracles, he said. We sold out a theater. Should his apparent success at drawing people to his lectures from every religious and even non-religious atheistic background be a legitimate litmus test for credibility on the matter of Christian cultural engagement?
Nope.
Well, see, that was just a poorly structured question. I think this speaks to an issue, though, that we do see a lot in our culture, and that is the bigger the crowd, the more, the better, greater voice you have, or the more powerful your voice would be.
Well, and that's the essence of being internet famous. I mean, the whoever has the most followers, the most leader, the most subscribers and things like that. I mean, speaking to these lectures, I haven't seen them, but I mean, again, he's not. It doesn't sound as though he's teaching Genesis from a spiritual perspective. He was sort of doing it from a psychological perspective, which can have some value. I've read some commentaries on scripture that were that included like a sort of like a Jungian understanding of like, Jacob in the book of Genesis represents this archetype. I'm not saying that there's no value in sort of like looking at some of those elements, but just because he did a series on the book of Genesis from that perspective doesn't make you a pastor, doesn't make you an apostle or an evangelist or anything like that.
Right. Is this just an example of him trying to identify with his target audience?
Yeah, I teach the Bible just like you guys.
Right. So you and I, we have this common thing.
Hello, fellow Bible teachers.
Right. And so maybe that opens the door for what he's going to suggest, which is through the process of teaching these Bible stories in the book of Genesis, I encountered a very interesting thing, namely the majority of people who both came to the events and who responded on YouTube were young men. And that cannot be easily explained. And so I think what he's trying to argue is that he's scratching an itch in the culture that the church hasn't been scratching, that he's dealing with something or speaking to something that hasn't really been dealt with or spoken to effectively.
And if he's saying that the church at large in this country hasn't done the job that it should have, or isn't currently doing the job that it should be doing, teaching the Bible, that criticism may be fair in a lot of cases. Because, I mean, we live in a culture of flashy rock star church, not a lot of exegesis, not a lot of deep teaching in a lot of churches. A lot of it is, and it's not that topical preaching is always wrong. Certainly, there's times to bring those types of messages, but there's a lot of topical preaching in the churches today. A lot of, here's 4 ways to have, the best marriage you can have, or something like that, instead of, hey, we're going to do a a series of sermons that's going to take us a year to get through the book of Genesis
Yeah.
or something like that. So if he's saying the church hasn't done a good job scratching that itch, he may be right.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yep.
may be fair.
That and the, part of the itch though deals specifically with how we are interacting with young men, and whether or not, I think he would argue, churches have been holding young men's feet to the fire, so to speak, or have we been holding them responsible to grow up from being children into men who can serve their families, who can serve their communities, who can serve their church, and that being the missing ingredient to the cultural preservation that he's looking for.
And he specifically seems to level that charge at the Protestants.
Yeah.
So he kind of mentions at one point in the video, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, and then kind of says, you guys are the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps it's true that, I don't know, the Catholic Church seems like such a, it's hard for me to diagnose exactly what's going on in the Catholic Church today. They have a pope who doesn't even seem to agree with what some of the priests on the ground are preaching anymore. But I mean, in an Orthodox type setting, I mean, have they done a better job, raising men to have a wife and have 14 children and sort of be productive members of the parish? Maybe.
Yeah. It's hard to say. But at the same time, I think Peterson does make a legitimate point that very often young men are disengaged, are disconnected from the church. I heard an interesting statistic recently, which was that Father's Day is the least attended day of the year.
Because Dad wants to sleep in.
Services.
Who wants to go to church?
Right. So, I mean, maybe that kind of speaks to the deeper issue there.
One of the things, though, like with saying that bringing back the men will fix everything, I mean, it just makes me think of like Mark Driscoll. Because, I mean, part of his shtick was that he presented like a masculine, very brash, very outward-focused version of Christianity. All the effeminate, soft men need to get out of here, and you better step up or I'm going to kick you in the butt. And like he had this very almost like
very aggressive,
very aggressive version of things. And I mean that ended up, and not even saying that there was no value in that movement, but I mean that ended in kind of a car crash.
Yeah,
for him. So
right. Well, let's get to kind of the centerpiece of the video, which are Peterson's 3 accusations. He basically says that the culture, there's a drumbeat in the culture, and there are 3 pillars upon which their entire vision of our world stands. And the first one is that human culture is construed as a patriarchy set up to exploit weaker people and weaker groups. Now, whether that's business enterprise, where someone's going to be taken advantage of for profit, or that's marital relationships, or even friendships, everything. The whole institution is set up as a patriarchy, which is intended to support the male-dominated leaders at the very top. The second claim he makes is that, and again, these are the claims of those who stand on the left, so to speak. The second is that human activity is a planet-despoiling enterprise. In other words, everything that we're doing is intended to, or not intended, but as a derivative, as a byproduct, eventually will destroy the planet and destroy the utopia that we had before humans showed up, and presumably the utopia that we would have if humans never existed, or after we're gone. So really the value should be placed on the planet and the ecology.
If there's no one here to see said utopia, then is there really a utopia? I
Right.
mean,
That's a good question. And then the third and final accusation is that male ambition is the cause of all that is wrong in society. Now, my whole thing is that if we're going to have a correct prescription for the problem that we face as a church in our culture, we have to start with an accurate diagnosis of the problem. Yeah. Now, these three things are certainly things that we could point to that signify issues in
it certainly
our culture.
is true in our culture, and particularly I think like in like college campus type environments, that you're either the victim or you're the oppressor.
Right.
Everyone wants to be some class of victim.
Well, that's the way it's set up because in their view, this is really a power dynamic, and every identity is associated with its own power. And the more oppressed you are, then the more power that you should be entitled to in order to resist said oppression. So it is very, very much structured as a kind of a power dynamic. And at the core of it, the argument is male ambition. The patriarchy is really the problem. And if we're going to deal with the broader cultural and institutional problems, then we have to first address this matter of male-dominated leadership and the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And so you need to feel bad about being a man, not only bad, but apologetic and yield to all those other oppressed classes.
And feel bad about your whiteness,
Yep.
feel bad about your heterosexuality.
Right. So I guess my question is, do Peterson's three accusations rightly sum up the problems that we're facing as a society, or is there something deeper? And if there's something deeper, how do we talk about that?
Well, these are problems, but I do tend to think of them as symptoms rather than the root cause. One of the reasons that I think you can tell that these are symptoms is the whole that whole movement, that whole thought process is really kind of in itself suicidal. So like that second point where he levels the charge against this left-wing thought process that humanity is almost like a blight on the earth. That's self-destructive even for them. Mm-hmm. We're not gonna get into the conspiracy theories, but I think we're only a week out from the Georgia Guidestones being destroyed.
Yeah, right.
One of the things that was printed on the Georgia Guidestones was that a sustainable civilization was only 500 million people in the whole world. So that means billions have to go away in order to get down to that number. I mean, if part of your worldview is, I wish there were less people like me. Yeah. You're not even doing a good job propagating your own worldview. You're saying I'm going away, and that's good. Mm-hmm. And then all that will be left will be the birds and the plants and the trees.
Yeah, which is a bizarre way to think about things.
It is, yeah. If I win, I'll cease to exist. It's like, okay, that's an interesting. That's an interesting way of doing things. So I mean, there's got to be something beneath that is driving that just weird, chaotic, suicidal view.
Yeah, and so I think as Christians, what we would probably say is that there's a spiritual dimension to this. This isn't just about a thought process. This isn't just about institutions. This isn't just about who attends church. Or what number of male participants you have on a Sunday morning. This kind of goes down deeper to the heart of what it means for the church to be representatives of the kingdom of God, and how the gospel is advanced in the world. If this is just a matter of pulling the right lever and getting men back into church, that would solve all the problems.
If only we had the right technique.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this actually is, there's a deeper spiritual issue here, which I'm not sure Peterson either recognizes or is able to effectively articulate.
When I watched the video a couple of times, and one of the things that occurred to me as I was watching it is I'm not sure, Peterson, that you're standing quite where you think you're standing. And so I in an initial conversation that you and I had, I think I kind of commented that he thinks he's a prophet standing on the mountain calling to all of us saying, hey, listen to what I have to say. And he's really standing on an iceberg floating down the river toward a waterfall. And it's like, yeah, there's value in what you say, Peterson, but you know, like, where are you going?
Yeah.
He thinks he's standing on solid ground with something important to say to us. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have anything important to say to us, but it's like, you're not standing on the ground that you think you're standing on.
Yeah, it's certainly a deeper issue than putting up a billboard and saying, "Men, you're welcome back," which is actually, you know, it might have been a bit hyperbolic. I'm not sure, but that essentially is what he's advocating for. The reality is that there are men in the church, and there are many millions of men in the church.
And it is a healthy, a good sign of a healthy church that you see that there are men there and that they're involved. Mm-hmm. I'm sure we've both been in churches where mom brings the kids to Sunday school and then she sits through church and dad is nowhere to be seen. Mm-hmm. I've seen that many times over the years, disengaged dads and husbands.
Yeah. It is a sign. It's certainly a sign of health. Peterson also challenges the deconstructionist thought processes of Derrida and so forth in the video itself, and challenges the idea that there should be no objective truth that coheres all of society. That he calls it logocentric. I think I understand where he's going with this, and I think it's an important point to make, that there are objective standards of reality, that truth isn't in the eye of the beholder. However, here's something that just occurred to me. How about Peterson incarnates his own logos and actually goes to church himself?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then you can be the thought leader that you claim that you are. Yeah. Instead of being presumptuous, you could actually be a legitimate contributor to the conversation of Christian spiritual engagement and culture.
Yeah. He may think that young men unmoored from any kind of cultural significance need that type of mentorship, but he does not. You know, it's almost like this is my prescription for what these young bucks need. It's not what I need. He doesn't come out and say it that way, but he may think that. I did have the thought, as he was saying, bring back all the men. First of all, we need men who are going to come back and get saved and then be a part of the church. Yeah. We don't want to just flood the church with a bunch of men just because they're men. And what are these guys all going to do if they don't, if they haven't accepted the gospel? There is no place for them if they haven't, repented. And
according to Peterson, they can straighten us out and we can straighten them out at the same time. You know, because we're not relevant anymore as most ancient
but a bunch of men would
institutions.
Make us relevant.
Yeah. We need these young guys to come in and make us relevant.
Yeah, it could be kind of like the Elks Club or something like that.
Yeah, look at all the good they do. I mean, it's a really great organization.
Yeah, but like Peterson thinks all the men should come back, but then like if he were to come back, he might not like what he hears from his pastor or his elders. I mean, he does adhere to an objective standard of reality, it seems. But if someone really like took one of these and said, well, thus saith the Lord, Peterson. Here's what I see in you that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
He might not go back to that church. So, I mean, if you're going to go to church, you also got to be willing to hear what the church has to say to you.
Well, it's easy to be authoritative when you can stand outside of an institution. And that's part of the issue. I mean, he just for context, this same sort of message was given to the Muslims as well. And online, you can watch the video, and we'll link the video in the description as well. So he did also put out a message to the Muslims, and it wasn't bring back the men necessarily. It was reach across the aisle to your Christian and Jewish brothers and sisters and try to create some positive energy around, trying to move us in a positive direction.
I didn't watch the video, but it sounds like you're saying like, oh, all we need are some good vibes, Yeah. Let's all get along.
Yeah. And so it's just, I think, another example of how you can be authoritative speaking outside of the institution. And as an outsider, you can sort of point at all the things that are wrong, and maybe try to pull
but also not fully understanding what's going on. I mean, if he really understood the Christian church and what it really stands for, he would understand that. I mean, there is no way. That's iron mixing with clay. There is no way for us to unite with the Muslims and the Jews in the way that it sounds like he's suggesting. Again, anyone's welcome to the culture wars. If someone, for instance, is pro-life,
right,
but they're not a Christian, I can still say, yeah, let's both go down to
arm
that march
arm
together.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
But we're not worshiping the same God.
Right.
And that kind of becomes tricky if that's what you're thinking is happening. And I would argue that Peterson probably has something like that in mind as he's going through these ancient stories. Yeah. Like they're the ancient stories of the Jews, the ancient stories of the Christians.
You guys are all Abrahamic faiths.
Correct.
You have the same archetypal
God
roots or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is why I think it's important for us as believers to understand and to be able to discern what the distinctions are between what Peterson is suggesting as a prescription for cultural regeneration and what Jesus argues is the prescription for cultural
repent
regeneration.
and believe the gospel. The kingdom of God is at hand.
Be baptized and make disciples and do the things that are commanded us to do as believers in Jesus Christ. Yeah. That's what our calling is. That's what our responsibility is. And Peterson seems to want to reduce it down to a mandate for cultural warfare.
Yeah. One thing that many of our viewers will be familiar with Doug Wilson. One of the things that Doug Wilson has said and written many times is that the choice is between Christ or chaos.
Right.
And I'm not sure that Peterson is quite there. He seems to rightly diagnose that the chaos is over here, but then his way that he solves that is we need stronger cultural institutions, because that seems to be his primary interest in the church is as a cultural edifice. It's there to sort of like help to uphold Western society, which the church has done that.
Yeah.
But he doesn't seem to be at the point where he realizes that we either worship Christ for who he is, or we all just descend into the abyss. Right. He knows the abyss is there, at least culturally speaking, but he doesn't realize that the choice is that it's Christ or chaos. The choice isn't Christ or Judaism or Islam or chaos. It's Christ or chaos.
Yeah, that's right. And I will say, for all of the things that we've been critical of, he does have, again, a very positive view of the church, and he does seem to recognize on some level that the church's mandate extends beyond doing social justice and beyond, saving the planet. And
There is a moral imperative
yeah,
there.
he does, to his credit, he does say, be concerned about souls. That's your job.
Yeah.
The question is, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And how ought the church to be concerned about souls? And what is the methodology by which we ought to go into the world and extend God's rule and reign vis-a-vis his kingdom? So that's the issue. So all in all, I think there's some good things that he says, but as Christians, we need to understand this from a spiritual perspective, and we need to go a little bit deeper than just the cultural symptoms that we're seeing, and then trying to combat those cultural symptoms with other cultural prescriptions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we could make the same mistake on the conservative side of things that they do on the liberal side, thinking that programs are going to fix this, thinking that structures are going to fix this, thinking
vote for the right politician.
Vote for the right politician. And we're not saying don't have programs. We're not saying don't vote, but we're saying that the deeper reality is spiritual. And if you have church or you go to church, but you don't sort of have the inner reality of that, all you have is a structure. All you have are the bones and not the flesh that goes on them.
And there's plenty of examples of that in Western Europe.
Yeah.
There are old churches and buildings which stand empty as a testament to exactly what you're talking about. The loss of the flesh, and the bones still exist, but there's no life there anymore. And if that's what we want here in the United States, then we ought to continue to do the things that we're doing. But if we truly want revival, then we need God to quicken us, quicken our spirits, and to bring his spirit to bear in our culture. Yeah. I think that's the answer.
Yeah. And I will say I sort of liked the kind of prophetic note that he ends on. He says, "The time is nigh," and then the video just
Boom.
ends right there. So I'm not sure what time he thinks is nigh, but I would affirm that the time is nigh, and now is not the time for fooling around. It's either Christ or chaos. We're either gonna follow Christ into his glorious kingdom of life and light, or we're going to descend into just a massive cultural suicide and just a chaotic mess.
So yes, the answer is men, get back to church.
And women get back to church.
And women get back to church. And, Peterson says, tell them what to wear, tell them what time to show up. Listen, we want this to go deeper than what you wear and what time you show up. We want you to become a follower of Jesus. And that, I think, is a good starting point for the kind of revival that we need in our culture.
Yeah.
So great conversation, Seth. Appreciate you taking the opportunity to talk with me today. For those who are not familiar with Anchor New England, you can check us out online at anchornewengland.org. There you'll find all kinds of helpful information and tools for apologetics and for teaching your kids how to defend their faith, including a video that we just completed recently called Theo's Ark, which is a great animated video. It comes with a workbook. It's free online. That's a pilot episode of a curriculum that we're hoping to build here at Anchor New England to provide tools for churches and for families to be able to encourage and strengthen their kids in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So with that, we're going to sign off, and we'll see you next time.
The time is nigh.